Okay, good afternoon. This afternoon I want to talk to you about two linked issues. The first one is I just need to give you some bit of background to the story of the Cochrane review on neuraminidase inhibitors, bit of a mouthful. At present there are two licensed neuraminidase inhibitors. The first one actually in time terms is zanamivir, which is the GlaxoWellcome, now GlaxoSmithKline Relenza. And the second one, which was registered just afterwards, is Roche's oseltamivir, also known as Tamiflu. We will be focusing this afternoon especially on Tamiflu, which is the blockbuster drug of the class. No one exactly knows how many capsules or cycles of Tamiflu they actually sold. But we know that there is a fracture between sale and consumption. That is because of stockpiling. You will all know what I'm talking about, stockpiling for the pandemic influenza, yes? Does anybody not know about stockpiling? You should do, because we've all paid for it. So, out of our own pockets. Okay. And then I shall try and answer the question, should biomedical journals publish randomized controlled trials, with an emphatic no. This question is not new. As far as I know, Richard Smith and Ian Roberts posed this question 4 or 5 years ago, but they also said no for reasons which are slightly different from mine. So here we go. The Cochrane reviews on NIs, shortened version, because that's a mouthful, neuraminidase inhibitors. NIs came out first in 1999, and it was then updated in 2005, 2006, then 2008 again, and in 2009 during the pandemic, the so-called pandemic of influenza. Now, you will see that there is an update which is pending. It's going to come out very shortly. And then probably another update or evolution of the work in 2012. And who knows, we may be still here in 20 years' time. Or you may be still here in 20 years' time. The 2005 was done, 2006 was published update was particularly problematic because of a series of problems which were identified by Dr. Keiji Hayashi. That's why the presentation is called Hayashi's problem. And I'll read you out in a minute what Keiji Hayashi said. Hayashi is a pediatrician in Osaka in Japan and a very acute observer, although he looks like a harassed, you'll see him in a minute, harassed person. The problems were legion, but I will try and condense them. This is the 2006 review, which was co-published in Lancet. It had the main feature between this and the previous reviews, the main update was the insertion of that paragraph. That paragraph essentially says that Tamiflu works against complications of influenza, chiefly pneumonia. Now, this is very important. There was another strand to it, which is there is evidence that it interrupts viral transmission. That's transmission of influenza from person to person. These two findings were key to the stockpiling. And I can't tell you how important they were. There's trace of these findings, not of our review, but the original papers, just about in every single public document that's still available, that hasn't been taken out of websites 2 years later or even a decade later. That statement was based on a meta-analysis of 10 randomized controlled trials, placebo-controlled, by Laurent Kaiser et al., which was published in 2003. And here you've got the article. Can you actually read this from the back? Yeah, indistinctly? Not so? You can come forward if you want. But the conclusions are that oseltamivir affects lower respiratory tract complications, so things like bronchitis and pneumonia. This article was funded by industry, and all the authors, except for Professor Laurent Kaiser, seen here on the left, and Professor Frederick Hayden, seen here on the right, were employees of Roche. Clearly identified as such, there's no issue on there. Professor Hayden described himself as a paid consultant and in the paper, and Professor Kaiser has never taken a cent for this work. So he says, and we have no reason to doubt him. Apparently he plays a mean game of basketball, Professor Kaiser. He's in Geneva at the moment. Here's Dr. Keiji Hayashi. What he said, writing to the Cochrane Library in the summer of 2009, started within our group, and possibly within slightly wider, a revolution. He said, hang on, you've taken the Kaiser meta-analysis, which is made up of 10 trials, only 2 of which have been published. 8 have not been published. In fact, they have never been published, he said in 2009, and they were never published. They weren't published certainly in 2003, and they still are unpublished today, as far as we know. You put them all in, you've done critical appraisal on the published stuff, but what about the unpublished stuff? Your analysis is not robust, and you should take it out, or check the original data. Full stop. Signed, Keiji Hayashi. So it's severe criticism. So obvious. So obvious. We'd actually put the data, we'd included the data in our review, we changed our conclusions of the review from earlier versions without checking the data. So, this is Professor John Trenner, and he's the author of one of the 2 published studies down there. Used to be known in our group as Trenner 2000, first author with a year. And here is the other published trial. I should tell you that these are treatment trials, so that this is oseltamivir or placebo in people who have had symptoms of influenza-like illness for no longer than 48 hours. So these are symptomatic individuals. Professor Carl Nicholson published his trial again in 2000, just after registration of the drug on Lancet, as you can see it. And then the only other piece of evidence that you should be aware of is that within the body of the Kaiser review, there was a citation to a huge trial, 1,450-odd people being randomized. This trial was not mentioned by any author's name because it wasn't published, and it remains unpublished to this day. But the reference was to this abstract, again by Professor John Trenner, who presented it, it said in the abstract, in New Orleans at an American Congress, IDSA, or something which stands for American Association of, I think, Infectious Disease Association, Scientific Association, or something like that, in New Orleans in the year 2000. Remember New Orleans, because it's important. Now, I emailed, in the summer of 2009, I emailed the 2 co-authors, and I asked them, please, could you give me the data from the unpublished trials? And these are the answers I got. Can you read them? Yes? Jeannie Lanza, who knows Jeannie Lanza? She's an American investigative journalist. She is very good with titles. She called this answer, "The Dog Ate My Study." Basically, they didn't have the data for a variety of reasons. They said, go to Roche. That was... later on, and I'm cutting half the story out, interviewed by Deb Cohen, part of the BMJ Channel 4 investigative service, Professor John Trenner said, well, I don't even recall being in New Orleans. I don't think I had anything to do with this trial, which we identify now with the ID M76001. I'm sorry, are you sure you got the right guy? This is what he said, verbatim. However, Dr. Smith from the Roche Pandemic Task Force said, well, you know, if he's not around, somebody's going to get hired to go and speak on his behalf or answer questions on the poster or whatever. What's the problem? Asked about some of the discrepancies and asked about the raw data from his trial, Professor Carl Nicholson answered like this. He went on record. Okay? We know that Professor Nicholson's trial was ghostwritten. We know because Deb interviewed the person who'd actually written it. She's got a PhD in biochemistry, nothing to do with medicine specifically. More declarations, it's still more the same. They don't know. They don't recall seeing the raw data. They probably saw some summary tables. Professor Trenner says he wrote the study. but basically these are unaccountable. We can't ask them for details from these 2 published studies in Lancet and JAMA because the so-called first authors know nothing about them or can't answer questions. Is this important? Who cares? Well, look at this. Here you've got their published names, Nicholson and 2000 and Trenner 2000. These are published versions ID. This is the real ID of these trials, WV15670 and WV15671. Analysis of the underlying clinical study reports, which are huge documents, regulatory documents, which are submitted to regulators, show that, for instance, while Nicholson in the published document makes no mention of adverse events and Trenner says there were no drug-related serious adverse events, study report lists 10 serious adverse events in 9 subjects. And in the 2 trials, 3 of these by the trialists were possibly classified as possibly related to oseltamivir. Total denominator of these trials is around about 900. So the two trials together are smaller than the biggest trial never published, M76001. At the end of all this process, we came up with unanswered questions which are still unanswered. Basically, we want to know why were these trials not published, who's responsible for these trials, what does the evidence show? Because by that stage, we'd lost all faith in the published record. We don't trust the published record on this particular series of family of drugs anymore. So much so that our forthcoming Cochrane review doesn't have any published material in it whatsoever. It's only made up of regulatory information. That's regulatory data, clinical study reports of the trials, plus regulators' comments, which were invaluable. The FDA and the EMA regulators' comments on the drug application were invaluable. Are we ever going to get the full clinical study reports? 2.5 years on, numerous editorials by Fiona Godley, media coverage worldwide. We're a lot further on, thanks to the Nordic Cochrane Center, who unlocked the gates to the EMEA or EMA freedom of information. We are submerged by pages. We have about 45,000 pages. What we do not have, though, are complete records. We still do not have complete records of all the trials that have been carried out. How many trials were carried out? We started with a list of 36 when we did our 2009 update. We're now at 116, but we're still not sure that it's all there. So we still don't know. It's all a big question mark. In all this, it became clear, quite clear, that we needed new methods. And here we go on to the second part of my talk. We needed methods by which we identified all trials. Yes, trials registers, but when these trials were done, the registers were not around. And anyway, trial registers, as you probably read recently, have got problems too. They're not policed, and sometimes they're not updated. And there is a plasticity. There's a changeable element to what is written in trial registers compared to what is published. And of course, we don't know about protocols because hardly anybody gets to see the protocols. We had to identify and retrieve, or we set out to identify and retrieve all clinical study reports and regulatory material, including FDA warning letters, very important pieces of evidence. We had to construct our own source, our own Medline, made up of this stuff, if you like, our own source of index of all the materials. And we had to put the qualitative evidence, that's the regulators' comments, inside, weave it into the review. And then we had to start doing the normal stuff, like clinical appraisal. You will see that the bill for this is astronomical in terms of resources. This is a very brief look at what the download from EMA. You look at this. I think the most important one is the one that I've highlighted. This is the trial that you will see excerpts from. It's called 16263. It's a trial that took place 11 years ago and was published a year ago. It is a cardiotoxicity phase 1 trial, and it's the only trial for which we have all modules. That's all parts in old speak, in old ICH speak, It's all parts of the trial. Modules 1, 2, 3, and 4, everything, including the protocol. And it's called the Randomized Double-Blind Parallel Group Placebo-Controlled Study of the Effects of Oseltamivir on ECG Intervals in Healthy Subjects. So it is a phase 1 trial. It's phase 1, maybe phase 2, certainly, on volunteers that took place a long time ago. Here is I think, the evidence that journals really should not be dabbling in publishing trials, probably of all drugs, and maybe even more trials of devices and drugs. We can talk about devices later after Deb has done her bit. Now, this is the clinical study report of the study 16263. You can see the number of pages. It is not a typo. I can assure you it's 8,545 pages in all. Its printed, published counterpart is 6 pages. Oh, who is small? Is anybody? Who is small? I don't know who small is. We assume he or she is the author of the clinical study report. But maybe, because I don't think it's likely that one person only wrote that, maybe he's the head of the team who wrote that? Or we don't know. There's no trace of this person on Google, so don't know. These, on the other hand, are all Roche employees. Not that that matters, because they're clearly identified as such. That's the published version of the trial. So it should be, in normal parlance, it should be called Dudkowsky 2010. But we refuse to use these names. We use the IDs, the trial IDs, 16263, much better. Now, can you please read the first 3 lines of this study design? You have to take my word for it, and you can trust me because I'm a doctor, that this is really the only description that we have of in the manuscript, in the published manuscript, the only description that we've got of the design, and most of all, the only description that we've got of the interventions. Okay? Ready? Okay, let's take the words oseltamivir and placebo, and let's go and see what it looks like in the clinical study report. This is page 422 of module 2. You will see the size, I think, is around about 6. Okay? The lady down there, very helpfully, thank you very much, blew up this size so you can see. That's the description of the Tamiflu oseltamivir capsule. 75 milligram capsule, which contains 97.5 milligram of active substance. Okay, it's a size 2. I didn't know any of this garbage before I started reviewing this. Now I got all 6 capsule sizes in my head. Please take a look at this. The body was gray, it was opaque, but the cap was light yellow and opaque, okay? So you've got a gray body and opaque cap, and this is the active principle of the trial. Remember, this is a safety trial. It's a toxicity, harms trial. It's oseltamivir, corresponds. This is the certificate of content. This is certified, I certify with my life that these capsules contain and look and taste as follows. And it's got all the degradation product, blah, 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 and that's the RO 64, etc. is the batch number of the capsule. The product itself is sometimes known as oseltamivir phosphate. Sometimes it's got the GS prefix, which corresponds to Gilead Science, who are the patent holders of the drug. Okay? You've got the details in your head? Yes? Can I move on? Let's go and look at the comparator. This is the placebo capsule. This is the batch number. This is the date of manufacture. Do you see anything else? What?
Ivory plus yellow.
Ivory in place of yellow. Thank you. So the placebo has got a yellow cap instead of a ivory white cap. And anything else? It's got something, it's got this thing here, which I'll go back to the previous one. You can see there's no dihydrocholic acid in this capsule. There's talc, there's povidone. The powder is almost white, but there's none of this. The powder is white here as well. There's dihydrocholic acid. Do you know what dihydrocholic acid does in doses of about 400 milligrams a day? I'm told 300, 400 milligrams. It is a cholagogue. It empties your gallbladder, and in those doses probably loosens your bowel as well. So why was it put there? Is it relevant? Is it important in the understanding of the trial? Is it an active placebo? And does the difference in the aspect of the placebo capsule matter? Does it actually matter that one is slightly different from the other? The answer to that is, I haven't got a clue. And that's the point. This is what we spent on NIHR money, on our NIHR grant, to do all this up to now. That's a team of 7 people, not everybody working the whole time, but we produced a website, protected website on a protected server called Stellar. Then we had to reconstruct the whole trial programs. And that took a whole time equivalent 20 days, but that was a mistake, because one person should not be doing that on its own or on her own, on his own. Then we had to construct this sort of baby medline. That was 35 days of a whole time equivalent. And then we had to construct this other index. But this index was easier because after several experiments, we managed to find a method to do it in 3 hours. And then it's taken us so far from September 2010 to now to get to this level of detail on the first 14,000 pages. So I will conclude my talk simply answering my own question, that no, journals should not be publishing drug trials for the simple reason that they don't have the skills to understand these trials, and most of all, skills can be acquired, but what you can't acquire is the level of resources that it takes to understand, begin to understand what the evidence tells you, as well as identifying and gathering all the evidence. So forget Medline, forget all the other databases. We're talking about the real evidence here, or as real as we're ever going to get. Thank you very much for listening to me.
Could you just say who you are, please?
Oh, thanks. Glenn Brownstein. I'm from Los Angeles. Where was the FDA and the EMA in all this? They get all this data. They have a slew of people who are supposed to analyze all this. Where were they in the regulatory management of the whole process?
The FDA didn't do a bad job. Now, I know that Americans are not very tender on the FDA, but I always have discussions with one of my American co-authors, Peter Doshi, because he says, you're too lenient. And I'm saying, no, I'm trying to be fair. They reran the analysis. They did site inspections, which is a damn sight more than it appears that EMA did. But whether that was enough or not, again, is a question I can't answer because I don't have the full data set. I don't know whether they had the full data set. They certainly had the power to sum up the full data set, something which I don't have. That's why I look to editors and I look to you to change the world, if you like, to make sure that all this evidence is available for independent scrutiny.
I just wondered, Tom, you've been given this burden of oseltamivir. It's just one drug company. Not, you might argue, a terribly important drug, except that it's cost the world a lot of money. What do you sense about the literature as a whole? I mean, do you think this is an indicator of a malaise across the entire literature?
Where's Doug?
Doug, what do you think? All right, let's have Doug. There's a
Now,
microphone.
the conversation we had with last night was, can we generalize? Whoa, we can't generalize. Ian says it doesn't really matter because it's the case story. It doesn't matter generalizing, it's the case story. We don't want another disaster. I don't know whether we can generalize. I sincerely hope not.
But what's your gut feeling, Tom?
If I told you that the zanamivir placebo, that's the other drug, had exactly the same problem, well, a similar problem than the Tamiflu placebo. So much so that at one stage I thought that the two trial programs had been designed by the same person for apparently deadly adversaries, deadly competitors. I don't know. But the reason for approving the drugs, black on white of the FDA, is clearly political. It's available. It's been available on the FDA website for years, as far as we know. It says quite clear as a statement that with the impending pandemic, this is 99, remember, impending pandemic or impending problem of influenza, we need to get something registered because since last time was 1988. We haven't had anything registered. The old Bill Silverman cry, do anything. What? Anything you can think of.
I think interpretation is very personal, as we heard earlier today, and I think many people in the room would think it implausible that this is totally unique and totally an outlier for these two drugs. My personal view is that qualitatively similar, if not quantitatively similar things do happen across many areas, and I wouldn't be more specific than that. But the idea that journals shouldn't publish trials is obviously a provocative suggestion. It's an answer, but I'm not sure it's the right answer. I think it's quite clear that the situation we see here is completely unacceptable. But exactly who should do what is part of the problem, because this is one of the most regulated industries in the world. Only drugs and the airline industry are the two, and it's not working.
So can I just say something? That oseltamivir is on the WHO list of essential drugs now. So it is an important drug. It's a worldwide important drug, like aspirin or penicillin.